YouTube channel. And let's see, we're getting ready to prepare for the live stream so that our YouTube viewers will be able to view this. One moment, please. So welcome, everybody. We're glad that you can join us for another Ask the Expert today. And of course, we have Stephen Bell. Take it away, Stephen.
Thanks, Lisa. Hi, everyone. This is Steve Bell, and welcome again to another ServiceNow Community Ask the Expert. Today we'll be going over part 4 of scripting best practices. I'm picking up from the last part 3 session in June. And what I'll be doing is a demonstration today. We've covered a lot of material in the last 3 sessions. Those sessions focused on various best practice problems in code and how to resolve them or how they should be resolved. In this round, what I'm going to be doing is showing you just general cleanup and applying those best practices and what really needs to happen with a piece of code. So what I've done is I constructed a piece of code from a variety of code I found out in the real world. I've taken that and lumped it all together as a single script include. I'm going to spend quite a bit of time actually doing this for this session as showing this and showing you what needs to be done and how it needs to be cleaned up, and some of the things surrounding it do take some time. And in this session, since this is a learning demonstration session, it's a little different approach than normal. This is what I do. I usually will sit down one-on-one with people and I'll show them the best practices that I want them to utilize in a piece of code. Or if I've done a code review, and nothing as bad as what I'm about to show you, by the way, if I had to do, the code itself needs to be modified, obviously, by the one who wrote it, but I'll actually walk them through the process and show them what I want done as far as cleanup is concerned. So that's essentially what I'll be doing on this session. All right, so that being said, got to clear my mouse. All right, that's me. My name is, for those who don't know who I am, my name is Steve Bell. I'm a 4-year MVP with the ServiceNow community. I am certified in 12 different topics right now. I have, as an instructor, I am also certified, missing one there I just got, which was event management, but discovery, ITSM, service mapping, and then I have most of the micro certifications available already. So I've been there, done that, been around the corner. Got over 36 years of development, management, and architecture experience. I've been up the ladder and down, and I enjoy getting my hands dirty with code, so there's me. All right, so what is this? This thing's a demo. I'm going to show you how to actually fix these particular issues in the code, why they're relevant, the importance behind it and everything else. I'm going to be talking as I go along cleaning up. Sometimes I'll be quiet, so don't worry about your audio not actually doing anything. That may be that I'm just sitting there clicking and cleaning. But you'll get the idea based on what I'm doing, and I will explain what I'm doing as I'm doing it. So let's get to the code cleanup. All right. So what I did is I created a piece of code, and this thing's got functions in it that I found out in the wild. These are real functions. Why people programmed them this way is a real head scratcher sometimes. Some of them are pretty awful. Just know that I've changed the names to protect the innocent, and I've cleaned up some things. By the way, side note, so this is my personal developer instance. You can get your own developer instance out on the ServiceNow development website, and you can upgrade it to New York, which is pretty cool. So you get a little bit of a preview of what New York will be like. Now, not all New York functionality is there because we haven't gone GA yet. That'll be in September, but some of the functionality is present in the New York version. One of those pieces is a new editor. Now this looks and feels like the old editor, but it's got some extras in it, and these extras are extremely important. I love this feature, by the way. Notice how when you're looking over this thing, you'll see that there are certain functions that are italicized. Those are important. If you drift your mouse over them, they underline. If you right click on it, you can actually go to the definition. Now for script includes, if you go to the main definition, it just opens up a new window and goes to itself. So not very useful there. But if I create an object and I want to go to the definition in the code, it'll take me to it. If I want to find out what the definition of a ServiceNow built-in function is, I right click and it will open that definition. If the definition is not available, it'll say open documentation. So there's some pretty cool things available now. See there, show documentation on Glide Record because it's a protected and hidden class, but you get the idea. There's some pretty cool features on here. So if I want to go immediately look up what's going on, it opens up a whole new window. Watch, show documentation. I love this. We're getting there, guys. This is slowly but surely becoming an IDE that is similar to the ones we used to get for client-server type work. Also for compiled language work, you know, it's slowly but surely getting there. So this is pretty cool that you can jump straight to a definition and find out more about it. Anyway, thought I'd throw that out there because this is cool New York stuff. All right, so if I got a bad piece of code, and this one's pretty awful, what do I do to go about starting to clean it up? You know, this one's not super long because I wanted to keep it short enough to be able to do this in the hour that I'm allotted, but at the same time, it's, you know, it's still pretty lengthy, and there still is a bit, you know, clunky in some of its use. I do like the fact that it highlights some things. I can go about fixing a few things up here, missing some semicolons in the code. Those are easy to correct. Okay, it all looks like it's got some of that stuff out of the way, so we can fix that up a little bit here. But let's take this and throw it into another type of editor. Now, I like to use Notepad++, and this is, you know, one of my favorite things to utilize.
I use that all the time. It takes out all those crazy little symbols that might get thrown in that you don't see, especially from like Excel.
Sure. Yeah. No, it's awesome. You know, it helps me a lot. I've got certain plugins in place that help me format, you know, JSON or JavaScript. I've got XML tools that help me format them out and take a look at them. I also, you can reverse that and you can one-line things, so you can min them. So there's some pretty cool stuff for those of you who are a little more advanced in it. Anyway, the reason I'm going to do it this way is I can do large replaces a little bit easier than the replace alls here, and it's a little more controlled for me than it is inside the editor. This editor is getting better and better all the time, and with each iteration we get a little bit more functionality and a little more ease of use, and you can always go to a little bit, you know, larger format. You can see I've squashed things down here, giving me more room to work on, and that used to be my biggest complaint with working with the built-in one. But anyway, let me copy this out. Oops. And I'm going to put this in my editor. And I'm going to change the language over. This is just stuff with the JavaScript side. Now, one of the problems that the ServiceNow editor still has, even in New York, is that the format doesn't always work right. And the very first thing I like to do is format the code. Now, this format button, generally speaking, is relatively bug-free, but if there's commented out if statements, stuff like this, it may actually get confused over this and format incorrectly. This one did not have that problem that I can see. Nope, they may have fixed it in New York. I've had it where it cascades down and indents underneath, thinking that this if is actually trapped further down, and it never does get itself figured out, and you'll see this kind of stuff going on. and it's all from the formatter. So I've learned to distrust the formatter. In New York, it looks like they may have fixed the problem, but I've had it actually work sometimes, and then next time I demo it not work. So I'm not sure what's up with that. But in that case, you know, I always go to the external editor paradigm, and this could be anything. You know, it could be any editor you want. There are several really good ones out there. I just happen to like this one. All right, so I'm going to format this thing out. That's, you know, clean up. Number one is just to kind of get it all indented right. Next thing I do usually is I like to have a couple of things. One of them is at the beginning of my code. The big thing here I want to point out is there are certain coding paradigms I utilize in all of my code these days. And one of those is the ESNext side of things. Now, ESNext is interesting in that it, let's see, the best way to put this. ESNext gives you the next round of functionality. Man, I'm having trouble with that today. ESNext. I'll set something up here so y'all can see it better. And what does this do for you? This actually gets one function out of ECMA 6, which is the next version of JavaScript, and that's the const function. Now we got this seconds conversion thing here, which really looks like 30 minutes, if that's really what this is all about. I have no idea. The name is not very relevant to me. There's not much information here. Let's see if this thing is actually being used anywhere. So this is interesting. Give me a second. I'm having a little trouble with editors. There we go. Let's see if there's, yeah, it actually is used. So we got it used in one place. This fits well with being a constant. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename it because it's 30 minutes. So I'll just say 30 minutes in seconds, you know, something like that. Or equals, and then I can copy this out, paste it here, and now I can actually get rid of this. Whoop, before I do that, let's find where it's being used and replace it with my new variable. Okay, and we'll get rid of this right here, and poof. All right, so now I can get rid of this line. It's a little easier to read, and there is no reason to stick it into the initialize, which happens when someone actually instantiates this particular class. So usage for this class would have been, well, still is, var stuff equals, and then new special utils, bang, bang, boom. When you have one of these in the code and it actually executes this line elsewhere, it causes this initialize to fire when this line is executed. And therefore, this piece of code was actually being executed on the initialize. I've moved it up. It's on instantiation, which is what this new does. It does the instantiation, and it creates this variable, which is then used throughout the function. So anyway.
Naresh had asked the question, any new enhancement on script debugger?
I haven't seen anything yet. I think there is. I think there's some extra stuff in there, but I haven't played with it yet.
Okay.
That's a good question. All right. Now, you all know how much I hate GR. I hate this thing. This is a non-descriptive value. It's maybe a glide record or glide records. There may be multiples in here. This is absolutely a bug. So, or it may be that this is a actual CI number. Since it says CIs here, go get a CI. This may be a list of CIs. I assume it is. You know, this kind of stuff makes me crazy. So let's you know, I've gone and done the tracking down on this, by the way, and I went and found some interesting things. this is a single glide record, despite the fact it says go get the CIs. So, you know, a couple of things on this is going to be a CI record. So we're going to change everything with GR in here to CI record. This is another thing I like about this editor is it highlights the value so you can go do this. I don't want to change it throughout the whole thing yet, just in this particular routine. See these extra comments on the end right here? These are absolute noise. They do nothing at all for you. If you'll notice, not only inside of the ServiceNow editor, but in this editor, all if statements, while statements, functions, everything else, including comments, have a wrap up. And I can find out where that beginning and end is anyway. But in this case, this is absolutely useless. So I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to get rid of this one right here because that's useless. It's noise. It clutters up the whole screen, and you have to maintain it because if this if statement changes for any conceivable reason, this next piece has to change too in order to stay relevant. Add a little space here. I'm not a fan of GSLog anymore. We'll get to that here in a minute. Notice that the return value is actually triggered all the way down. This is kind of interesting. I don't like the ret value. First off, it's not camel case. Second thing is that it isn't really telling me what's going on, even though, you know, what are we returning? So, you know, we could call it a Boolean or whatever. I would just say, you know, something like, you know, is it relevant or something? So relevant CI, yes or no. We'll do that. We'll call it relevant CI. And use a real name. I mean, self-documenting code is extremely important. Yeah, it's a return value, but what is it for? So is it relevant? You know, are we trying to do something here? Are we trying to find a particular CI with a particular value? We've got a variable embedded. It's, you know, obviously a field inside CMDBCI. This is a legitimate check. So in the record, there's a CMDBCI field. Inside the CMDBCI field, there is or object is a retrieve CI's table field apparently, and this is something that someone set up. It's probably a U underscore if I remember right. So this was a bug, and there is, you know, they just wanted to see if it was actually filled in. So this is a null check of sorts. This is dangerous in a way, but not too terrible. It is common to do this inside JavaScript, so it is a JavaScript standard to check null values by just putting them in like this. So I'm going to leave it. However, here's something interesting with it. This right here is a check in and of itself, right? And it will return a true false. This is not what I would call a smart move, but you could do this. Better yet, you could do a nil check on it, which is a lot safer, and therefore get rid of all of this right here. Okay, so now I've got an actual check. You notice this utils. I love the name myutils. I would have gone and renamed that. So, you know, something like CI utils or something. I'll give it a real name. I also, since utils is only being used once, there is no reason to even create a variable for it, which by the way is a small performance hit. I would instead do this. That's perfectly legal. All right, so now I've got another one of these down here. I can actually grab this thing, drop it in here and get rid of the if. Now, interesting enough, this right here then holds no meaning. If you look at this guy right here, I'm replacing it right here. So, okay, let's take a look at this again. Now, what was I trying to do with all of that? And this is the part I was talking about. If I'm willy-nilly just changing stuff on the way down, you want to understand it before you do so. So granted, you know, this right here could be dropped into this and I could put a not in front of it and actually get the value back. if I have it as true already based on this previous one, and this is false, then I don't want to fix it. But this reuse of values down through with different checks is something that needs to be well documented. There are no comments, notice. So I have just kind of sussed this out as to what's going on here. Let me fix this one up again. But you get the idea. I'm trying to understand this piece of code and trying to figure out if there's a bug someplace. Are there bugs in the cleanup? By the way, when I get a bug in a particular place, I clean the whole function. I don't just fix the bug. Fixing the bug and leaving the rest of it dirty, you may not actually have fixed the bug. Own the piece of code you're working on, which, in this case is this small function. Track down things. I may have to live with my utils. Gad, I hope not. And I also love this one here, hello world. It's obviously someone copied this from a piece of code they got in class somewhere, or they got it off the web someplace, and they didn't bother to change the value in the object that's being returned. So this my utils is suspect, because that's where they went to get this object. And then this thing that, whatever utility, this go get CI's utility, which happens to have the same name up here, you can see this thing's rife with possible confusion, and you want to be very careful about that when you're doing any sort of work with maintenance. I just love this piece of code. All right, so let's keep going. I'm going to change the name on this, but I'd have to track down wherever it's being used inside the code, right? Because if I change it here and I don't change it there, whatever, is you trying to use this, no longer can find the function, it'll break. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, we got a quick question. Naresh asks, can you explain what's the difference between returning Boolean value and returning a string value from script include? I mean, return true versus return in single quote true.
Okay, gotcha. I know what you're talking about here. So you're talking about this var, val1 equals true, false, or whatever. And then var val2 equals true, that. And the first one is an actual Boolean and can be tested for by just simply having it in a an if statement, if val1, then do something. This other one, and you'd have to actually test for it, if val2 so you'd actually have to test to see if it's true. Whoops, I got an extra space in there, didn't it? When you return, you have to do checks like this on the value being returned. You can also, I created a parsing function for Booleans, but it doesn't exist out of the box out there. It's always better to have this. You can also play the game of creating a Boolean out of this. And then testing for val3. But you get the idea. This is a string. That's the difference. So if it doesn't matter if you return a true, that's an actual Boolean, you can test for using normal checks, by dropping it straight in. If I have a val4, something like that, and I have this, like you're seeing right here. This is a null check. So if this is filled in, it'll go in. If it's not filled in, it will skip it. So those are the kinds of things that JavaScript can really make your head hurt on. And it's because there are no strongly typed variables per se inside of JavaScript. Strong typing means that, I'd have the word string in front of this like in a real language. But because of its capability of having everything as an object, then var is the actual assignment. What ends up happening is then under the hood, this becomes typed as Boolean. It's not a strong typing because I can come along later and turn it into something else, but this is a Boolean. This right here is a string. This right here is a null object and contains no value. This right here is a Boolean because the evaluation here will be either true or false. And this becomes then true or false as a Boolean. Does that make sense? Did that help?
Can we return gr.active?
Yeah, that's an actual Boolean. No, actually yeah, that's a Boolean because it's a true false underneath the hood, and therefore it actually returns a Boolean, not a string. So a glide record active field for that particular single glide record will have a true or false built in or in it because it is that type of field.
Great. He said, thanks. Very well explained.
Okay. Yeah. This type of stuff is JavaScript, and but inside ServiceNow, because of the variance of JavaScript, a lot of ServiceNow developers get tripped on it. So I'm happy you asked the question. I'm going to hold on to that just for grins and giggles. I'll keep it posted out if people are interested in having it. All right, let's keep going with this. All right, some comment describing overall functionality that that this thing accomplishes, and the idea is self-documenting code. This is a single CI record. Notice no plural. Relevant CI, not a this is a Boolean, and it's initialized by whatever gets returned from this. So and if this doesn't work, we want to be able to test for that. So this is silly to have this here because we just tested for it. So let's go ahead and put this here. So if it is filled in, we can say true. You know what? This all becomes irrelevant then. Because it is all handled by this first variable. So what we're saying is if it's true, if it's filled in, then it's true. Therefore, set it to true. Well, then we don't need it. Cool. I'm already getting rid of pieces of code I don't need. All right. So what am I doing here? I'm checking to see if hello world is a variable. Ugh, I hate this. So I'd want to go check this guy and find out why he's called my utils, why this is called go get CIs, what functionality is that, and why does it have a variable called hello world? And this becomes a target then for cleanup, big time. I would go chase that down in a heartbeat, which I did, by the way, and I ended up fixing it at this particular client. The whole my utils thing was something someone had slapped together, and they had taken something they had gotten from one of the classroom things and put it all together to go get a bunch of CIs from a glide record and bring it back as an object. And this object was actually JSON. So that part was actually pretty cool that they had done, but the naming conventions were terrible, especially not changing this from hello world to something self-documenting. So unfortunately, if I don't have ownership of this, I can't go fix that. I have to leave it. So that becomes comment world. What does this actually do? Go retrieve a JSON conversion of the given CI record. Something like that. And so it's not self-documenting, but it is documented. That makes sense? All right, now another one. And this is the gs.logs are leaping off the page at me. First off, gs.log, remember, is not and I repeat this, is not scope safe. Don't use it. I've been leaning away from it pretty heavily, especially for what you're seeing right here. I have a couple of ways of making this better. Highly recommend staying away from gs.log, and I'll show you a couple of things that I do. First off, you know, you have a couple of things you can do to make life easier. Number one is create a location variable. And by the way, gslog, the only reason you'd ever want to use it is because it has capability down here on the end to have, you know, something that is location. And I can create a location variable here that will then show up inside of the system logs, and it will tell me where this came from. That right now, all this will do is say, some script out there wrote this information into the log. It won't tell me what script it was. It won't tell me anything relevant about that sort of thing. And I like to be able to go find this without having to go search for it. So what do we do with gs.log? Well, we can do something simple. We can call gs.info, copy everything out of here. And bang, we're converted to something that's scope safe. All right, well, that's step one. Looks better. It's not very nice looking. So, you know, what are we trying to say with this thing? Well, first off, it's going to be a little hard to find. Number one, it doesn't have any sort of location. Number two, it doesn't have any identifier in front of it. I always like to throw some sort of arrow in front so it's easy to go search out in the logs. But it really doesn't tell me much about where it came from. So I need to have something that actually drops the location in there. Well, let's create a location variable. I'm going to go up here. I'm going to var location equals blank. And then at the beginning of each one of my methods that are inside of the script include location equals tick tick, or I'm sorry, the name here. Now I'll put a dot in front of it, and I'll show you why here in a moment. So, okay, this is my location. What it means is, where am I? Well, when I'm executing this gsinfo, I will be inside this method. What's really cool about this is I can whack a this dot type onto the front end of it. And this dot type is all the way at the bottom of every script include, right here. And notice this is the name of the actual script include. So I can access this by saying this dot type. Therefore, this becomes my variable for this entire method. Therefore, I can stick it in here someplace, but it doesn't go in easy on something like this. So let's change this up a little bit. I'm going to do variable replacement. I'm going to stick it at the front here. I love variable replacement because it allows me to manage my messages very well. And in this particular case, we'll replace this too. And as you notice, then the message becomes very easy to maintain. There you go, that's the entire message. All right, then the variables. I always use arrays. Arrays are safe. In theory, you can have up to 5 variables without an array, so I can comment to limit them out here. But the array itself is very safe. You can have 20 values in here if you want to, heaven forbid. And this becomes then very managed. I like the array side of things. You don't need it for if you have less than 5 values, and therefore, you know, you can just swap out, but I like this a lot. So, okay, let's put location in the first one and CI record number in the second, and put a semicolon on the end. And now when this thing prints off inside the system log, it prints where it came from, which is this information right here. And I get my value right here. And my entire message is this right here. And let's get rid of gsinfo. So that's, you know, we'll go ahead and set up all the rest of these that way. And we got object CRIs. And what I'm going to do is just colon instead of equals on this one. And we have a JSON stringify, and I'll replace this here. And that gets this one taken care of. And then I have this I don't need. This really isn't necessary either. I'll leave that one in because it makes sense. So what am I trying to say here? I just want the relevant CI information. So I'm just going to do that right here, colon, and replace this and get rid of that. All right, so better. Actually, you know, a little bit easier now to understand what's going on. This automatically embeds the location into the message and throws it out onto the log. But we can actually clean this up just a twitch and make it better. And how we do that, I'm going to do it 2 steps. But how we do it is interesting. There is a way of doing this for the entire routine, and there's a way for doing this just as internal method tracking. One of the big things that's jumping out at me right now about this particular utility or method function is that even though I do a nil check here, my object is being checked for something right here, and there's no nil check on it prior. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm not going to bother with that right here. I'm instead going to demonstrate a try-catch in here, and we'll do that instead. So location, I'm not worried about. Record number, I am worried about blowing up. So if I try to print it out, you know, it'll be a null. The only things that try-catches really help you with are when you're going a couple of deep things, or you're trying to toString a null, things like that. So if I were to like say .toString here, which is stupid because you can't do a greater than here, but if I were to toString this and this was null, kaboom, and a try-catch would be very useful there. So no try-catch here. So we'll use one of my methods for hanging on to messages and stuff. So var message equals tick tick, and well, put an arrow in front of it, \n. And what's cool about this is that it will, I'm going to now do a string append on this thing all the way down, and it'll have this at the very beginning of the message that gets printed into the system log. It'll do a new line in the system log and then put all the following messages after it. Now, here's the cool part. I'm going to change all these gsinfo into gs.getMessages. This allows me to do string replacement and string assignment. And I'll show you what I mean here in a second. Now I'll do a message plus equals on each one of these guys. And down at the bottom here, before I do my relevant CI, I'll do a gs.info message. Now, if I have a try catch, I've got to handle this a little different, but in this particular case, it's just fine. I'm printing off my flag. Everything else looks good. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, so another problem, and it's one that very few people realize, is that when you have this kind of plus equals, if you don't next line the line after it, it'll run them together. So after the end of every one of these, we want a \n. So that's a new line on that particular one. And I always throw it on the last one just for grins and giggles, so there's a space between the next message printed. So there you go. This prints off a single message that's all grouped together. They don't show up all over the place inside the system log with other messages between them. They're just all together. I like this method better. I have one that I use that is, you know, for much larger functions and things like that, that I pass around as an object. Go ahead.
A couple more. Someone says, what about putting the location in the source? Then
it doesn't work for gsinfo. That's what I was talking about. On a gs.log, yes. Matter of fact, this is perfectly legal. And then you could put the location right here, and you know that will work. I wouldn't do the variable replacement then with the location throughout all the lines. And actually, I can get rid of this now because I'm not using it here. And you could do it up here even. We could have location up here, and then it appears for all of it. Let's do that. I can think of better ways of doing this as I go along. Nah, I'll leave it. I liked what I had better. But you get the idea. This right here allows a source. GSInfo does not have source modification.
Well, on that, someone asked, can explain the syntax of gs.info passing messages through arrays.
Not sure I understand the question. If you're wanting to do an array, boy, this message thing is the way to do it because you get all the values in the array. So if you're looping through an array, do the GSInfo like this, because you could then tack each one in as you're going along inside the array. Have a try-catch, so if anything busts, you can still grab the relevant information and put it in the system log. But as far as that's concerned, I'd have a single GSInfo in an array.
I missed I missed two questions. Can we return GR active? And then the next one, what's the alternate of GA log in scoped apps?
Okay, the GR, it must mean GS log. There is GS, and for scoped, I'll answer that last one first. GSInfo is the replacement to gs.log. Actually, there are three. It's GSInfo, GSWarn, and GSError. I can't spell warn, we're flip here. Those are the three replacements. And those replace gs.info inside of scoped apps. So GSInfo does not work in a scoped app. These three do. There is no analog for warn and error.
GA log?
Okay, there is no such thing as GA log. Well, I know what they're talking about. No, GS log is the these are the replacement for GS log. Now that other question, the return, I thought I already answered that.
Okay, then I said I must have missed it. So.
Oh, okay, all right. Oop, one too many.
It's hard to keep up with you, Steve.
I've got 18 minutes to go over a couple more things here, and I'm sorry. This is Ask the Expert, so I don't mind the questions. Keep them coming. But anyway, this is just, I'd get rid of all these because they're not necessary anymore. They were for searching the log. And now that everything's getting tacked together, I just search for this, this ###. All right, so that's relatively cleaned up. It's somewhat self-documenting. We've got a lot of stupid messages in here. Some of them, the difficulty here is, do I ever want to actually have these print off in production? And you can set up in the initialize function. I could do a get property. And I could set up my own property. So var, or not var, I have a var out here. Var logging, and have it false right now. And then have a variable set up, I guess no variable set up in a property someplace. So I could actually do logging equals gs.getProperty and have it go off and get a property for this particular thing. I would call it something like my company dot special utils dot logging, and then initialize it to false. And I can't spell logging.
And should we be using log or GS log in transform scripts?
I would use GSInfo in transform scripts.
Okay.
Again, scope safety is huge with me right now, because someday you may decide to use your library or script include inside of a scoped application, and even though it's global, things that aren't allowed inside the scoped application, like gs.log, will kaboom, they will explode. So I stay away from things that will explode inside scoped apps these days, and I've gotten so that everything is done that way. And then you can say if logging turned on, boom, there you go. And that way, my logging property is automatically set up. It's initialized. It is safe, because it means if no value is found, it won't be null for some reason. And then logging is used to turn the messaging on and off. And notice, I don't have to do it for every one of these. I just do it for when it actually prints. So that's useful. I can also get granularity out of this. I can say logging for a particular function can be turned on. I have never done that, but it is possible to do that. All right, let's go on to a little bit more work here. Here's one that has a try-catch. Again, find priority ones, not camel case. So I can change that real quick. It's only in here. Let's see. Now, see where the try-catch is surrounding? Well, first off, let's get rid of all this extra noise here. Totally, absolutely not necessary noise. Notice I can collapse these. Works the same way inside of the ServiceNow's editor. I can collapse the try-catches. Now, try-catch does work for add encoded query. It does not work for regular glide records. So in this particular case, this try-catch is relevant. Now, the real question is, why set up a function like this when your sole purpose is to return a glide record? Well, this actually is kind of useful. It could be to return a single glide record, which I'll be using later on, and provide additional functionality in that regard. Really, unless this is called multiple times, or you plan on using it in multiple places out in other code, this kind of function really isn't that useful. But since this is a script include library, it may be that this is intention or is intended to be used multiple times out there. Only create a function for something like this if you really absolutely plan on using it multiple times. So again, set up a location variable or location. You can see how the cleanup occurs here. We've got a glide record here that needs to be changed. This can be change request. And you can do the search and replace. With this kind of cleanup, I'm real careful about it. This is interesting. So they're mixing their paradigms. GSError is part of the new paradigm that's scope safe. GSLog is not. And it may be that try-catch was added by another coder later on. This kind of thing it's returning a single change request. I could actually rename this to be priority ones. I like this for readability much better. And yes, it's okay to name. Don't be a lazy programmer. Don't just put GR up there. This makes sense in paradigm with, or in context with this, and I like that. This kind of message is okay, but this is a mystery message that would appear inside of the system log in production, and it doesn't have anything around it, making it go away. If you turn it off, like we had up here with the logging, we could put that in place. You can just say info and it will be fine. This really doesn't tell you where you are, and you get the idea. So you could say something like find priority one started. Basically this is a made it to here function, GSInfo, and is only it's only useful for things like debug. And when I'm programming something, I'll have debug messages in there, but I'll put a debug comment next to it, and then I'll go search all those out and delete them. So really, this is a meaningless logging statement. It really doesn't help me any except for when I'm trying to figure out where I am. So not needed. And if you'll notice, almost everything here looks pretty good except for this error message, which what we'll do is we'll do something similar up here. I'll grab the front end of this here. stick it right here. I don't need this error. I like capitalizing. And by the way, this isn't necessary. I'll show you what will work. And then what you have is location, comma, ERR, and close bracket. So you can do ERR and it automatically returns the dot message. So it isn't necessary to actually use dot message on the end. It's not, it's okay to do that. It doesn't hurt anything. This is a preference of mine, or just tossing the object in and it automatically resolves to the message. And there you go. I think that's everything. I usually like throwing on this error message the little arrow for easy to find, and that's pretty good right there. It almost doesn't make sense to even have a variable because we're only using it the one time. So really I could do it like this and stick this down here and get rid of the variable at the top too. Usually I like having these at the beginning kind of as a standard. And even if I'm only using it once, then later on, if I decide to throw a gs.info message in there, I can automatically utilize it again. So I leave them around. This is called leaving your environment better than what you found it in. Now, if I don't use a variable, I delete it. I can always recreate them or can always get it back from versioning. But in this particular case, since I'm using it, once down here, it actually improves readability. So there you go. All right, next one. Again, I would have a comment at the top explaining what this thing does. Go get the priority 1 records from change request, stuff like that. But something? It's fairly obvious what's going on here. So really for self-documenting code purposes, having a comment on the front of this, it's useful to throw it in there so someone glancing through can quickly understand what they're looking at, but beyond that, not really any need. All right, this kind of stuff makes me crazy. So change all states first off. Again, no camel casing. If you do change the name of something inside of a library, make sure you go chase it down first, or you intend to change it, chase it down, find out where it's being used. If it's being used elsewhere, you might have to have a larger change request to impact everything. But to bring this into standard, camel casing is the preferred. All right, so I'm going to leave it because I don't know what all it impact. What drives me crazy is these in parameter comments. Okay, take the time. This is very difficult to read. Take the time, change all states in blah, blah, blah. Then limit recs, or I could have parameters, colon, and then limit recs. I hate the name.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
Naresh says, why did we use Trycatch when the query seems to be correct?
Because on this one, if the query were wrong somehow, or if it had embedded values, you're absolutely correct. I did this for demonstration purposes. It isn't necessary. We could do this, and voila. Actually, you could do this. Now, maintainability of this code is not the best. I could, conceivably pull this back up one line, put it right here. You're absolutely correct about the fact that this has no possibility of error in it, and nor would it cause a problem with encoded query. But if I had a variable embedded in the middle of this, normally I use this kind of nomenclature. I don't know, I'm just throwing something in there, myvar, and then, whatever, and then put it in here. You want to try catch around things because the value may have information in it, or it may actually drop something into the query that would cause a problem. Encoded query is the only one that returns the actual error and for a glide record, and therefore you want to try catch around the whole thing. But he's absolutely right. This has no possibility of error in it, and a try-catch would not be necessary at all. I was just using it for demonstration. All right, so back to this. I take this parameter, and since I've got information on the parameter, I don't need this here, and cleans it up significantly when I do that. These values are all parameters. They're not nicely named at all. I hate limit rex as a name. What's wrong with limit? So I'll do H and limit and replace. And I think I got it all. All right, so there's nothing wrong with using that. Be careful of reserved words. I'm going to get rid of these comments because they're extra noise. And this is the last piece of this demo I wanted to show. So again, inconsistency of code. Believe it or not, that previous one and this one were both from the same code. This one used the error, if you remember. This one does not use error. It uses the old logging. I wanted to show this parameter stuff, but I also wanted to show the fact that these are worth renaming. The query is interesting because it's a past encoded query, so that means this is dynamic. Why not just call it something along those lines? Don't put stir in front of things. This is very old school and is not necessary. Instead, you want self-documenting everything. Again, this first comment is I made it to here, so it's not relevant. Give some white space in here. We'll be changing out all of the logging for the new paradigm and getting rid of anything that isn't useful. So these would all go to messages with a gs info at the end. This would be a GS error. And again with variable replacement and location. You want to put location at the beginning.
Can you throw some? Can you do a session on design patterns? And Naresh also asks, can you throw some light on using private function in SI?
I have 3 minutes left. Let me answer that second question online, and then the first question is, yeah, I could do something on design patterns. Design patterns are interesting with JavaScript, and there are certain things you would like to do. There are 3 different scripts for example, on script includes, and they all have their uses and when you would fool with them. One of them I don't like using at all anymore. And it's one actually we train people to use. The other 2 I heavily use. So yeah, we could do something on design patterns. I could probably fit that in. Lisa and I were doing some planning before this meeting, and I could probably fit it in November. We'll see. Okay. Got one for October, nothing for September. Got one for October coming, and then one for September or November coming, and possibly one in December. And then we start the new year. But yeah, let me think on it, because I could get into some of the design concepts inside ServiceNow and why you'd want to use them. All right, so just to wrap this up, you can see things like this are a lot more readable and understandable. Again, GR, don't use it. Use something that is self-documenting and much easier to understand. The try here is for the encoded query. The string being passed in is an unknown and may have an actual buggy query coming in. So this would be an excellent reason for having a try-catch. The other components of it, the log would be all gs.infos with the replacements. This person actually knew about the tabbing and spacing capability of logging. So this is old. This code is very old, and it probably was never constructed with a scoped environment in mind. So it's pre-Fuji probably. Get row count. Don't use it in production code. It does have a slight impact to it, performance impact. So you want to debug around this if you absolutely have to have it. you know, make sure that you put some sort of logging. I mean, you know, if some says only turn this on when I actually want to see these values. There's a lot more I was going to show. Here's some more of the parameter ones. I love this. Anyway, that all get moved into a comment at the front. Notice the try catch on an event queue, totally unnecessary. So another one of those things, get rid of it. Extra logging, a lot of noise, get rid of it. There's a date diff down here I wanted to show you all. Notice how noisy this is. All the extra commented out code, get rid of it. You have versioning. Get rid of the commented out logging isn't necessary. Look how fast this thing cleans up. And you're going to love this.
Great.
I'll take a second or two to show you. So all this stuff, get rid of it. And then here's where it gets really interesting. None of this is necessary. They've reinvented the wheel. What they're trying to do is take a start and end date. And this is a live piece of code I found. I love it. You just basically say var start date equals glide date time, and then you can put the GDT start in here and dot, and then get numeric value and semicolon. And what they're trying to return here is in milliseconds. See, integer milliseconds. Integer's totally not necessary either. And I'll go do this and do an end date. Pretty sure I got the format right on this. I'm doing it off the top of my head. There. And then you do a return of end date minus start date. And you'd want to check to make sure these are legitimate dates, and then you're done. All the rest of this can go away. There's your new date time function. And this returns the milliseconds. So that replaced everything that they had there before. The underscore says this is a system thing. And that's a nomenclature that is for the developer only. It has absolutely no impact on JavaScript itself. This is supposed to mean that this is a system level and utility function. And that's all this is supposed to mean. And not only that, but it's to be used internal to this particular thing. Also, you can see the comment before that was interesting too, because looks like they're doing some date diff stuff using this function here. And whereas milliseconds is all fine and dandy, what are they actually trying to do? Anyway, get the idea. There was some other cleanup code if I had the time to go show, but this sort of thing takes a little bit of effort, and it's much easier to maintain after you're done. It's much easier to read and understand, and you'll notice that it's very minimal comments because it's self-documenting code, and it's scope friendly and production friendly. So there's a lot to it. It's more advanced coding technique, cleaner. I can't wait till we go to ECMA 6, because ECMA 6 brings a lot of that kind of stuff with it. Hopefully, it won't come in New York, but hopefully Orlando will get ECMA 6. All right, that's it for this session. A lot of things to take into mind to understand what's going on. Cleaning up code allowed me to refactor things and make them easier to maintain. In some cases, able to actually get rid of code because it became patently obvious it wasn't needed. You won't notice that if the code is badly organized and if there's a lot of noise in the way of comments around it. It is not necessary to comment the end of every if statement and everything else. No reason to close that out. That's very old school, and it isn't even Java standard or JavaScript standard. All right.
Well, fantastic. Well, thank you all again for joining us today. Be sure there's to ask your questions if you have more on the community link that was provided in the chat windows. Stephen, we've also have some people who have been asking for your presentation.
Okay.
In some previous Ask the Expert events. So if anyone else has any other questions, just let us know on the community. Thanks again, and we'll see you maybe hopefully next month, if not October.
Thanks, Lisa.